All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, Paula, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Paula Fontenelle. Paula, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you for having me here and for inviting me.
You are welcome. So Paula was a journalist and a published author in Brazil when her father took his life in 2005. Her search for meaning in the face of this tragedy led her to make a radical career change. Today, she's a psychotherapist with a master's degree in clinical mental health and a deep dedication to reducing the enduring cultural stigma surrounding suicide. Paula is the author of Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, Paths to Prevention, which was a finalist for the Brazilian Book Award. She's also the host of the podcast and the YouTube channel titled Understanding Suicide, where she interviews individuals touched by suicide, mental health professionals, and specialists. Paula, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you.
All right. So, well, let's start off here. Share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently. Well, then we'll dive in.
Well, I am from Brazil, from the northeast of Brazil, a beautiful city it's right on the coast, called Recife. That's Recife. And currently I live in Portland, but right now as we speak, I'm in San Francisco. I came here for a concert.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
So, well, congratulations on the book. I mean, that's pretty amazing, finalist for the book award. Let's start. How did this unfold for you?
Well, it started with the death of my father in 2005. And as you know, because you talked about trauma on your podcast, and I'm sure you've heard about this, it's a very confusing time for all of us who lose someone to suicide. Not only we have to deal with the death itself, with the loss, but all the silence that surrounds suicide, all the fear, all the guilt, the shame. And it's really, really hard. And at the time, I didn't really have any contact with suicide. It was one of those things that you think it only happens to somebody else, not to you. It was really not part of my family history, friends. I just didn't have I wasn't in touch with that, as it usually is. And when it happened, my mind, actually now when I go back, Guy, and now I understand as a therapist, that's what trauma does to memories. I have so few memories of those days. I have the memory of my sister calling me the day before he died, my sister calling me the day he died in the morning. She woke me up with the news that he had died. And then after that, it's a blank. I have zero memory. I actually had to reconstitute it in my book through interviews and trying to understand what happened. Yeah. But it was very confusing. I had so many questions, even though, and that's the weird thing with suicide, even though when you do know the reasons, all the questions that you have, it just there is never an answer that gives you like that, period at the end. Mm-hmm. So I had all these questions, which is normal. And I started at the time, and that's how I deal with difficult moments in my life. I want to understand. I want to understand what's going on. So I just started reading like crazy. And the very, to me, disturbing thing at the time was that I couldn't find anything in Portuguese, which is my language. In Brazil, the stigma was so huge, you just couldn't find books. There were a few articles, but very academic things. And I couldn't find, but fortunately, because I speak English, I started buying books online and having them delivered to me. And I just became obsessed with this thing because I wanted to understand. I knew what he was going through. I knew the difficulties he was having. So it wasn't a matter of, wow, why did he do that? But still, you keep asking yourself over and over again, what leads someone to losing hope to that degree? So I read and I read and I read, and I realized I was, as you said in the beginning, I was a journalist at the time, and I just took it as my responsibility to fill the gap, and that's why I wrote the book.
How close were you to your dad? What was your family consisting of at that time? Was there your mother in the picture?
Yes, they had been divorced a few years before he died. But yes, they were both in the picture. I have two sisters at the time. We were all, one of them was living here. Yeah, no, we were all living in Brazil actually at the time. Now we all live in the US, but my brother had died. So we had a brother who died a few years before my dad died. And I think that was one of the precipitating reasons for his suicide. I had a very complicated up and down kind of relationship with my dad. He was an alcoholic, and that brought a lot of problems to our relationship and to the family dynamics. But the last 2 years, I fortunately, Guy, and I'm really happy that I did this, the last 2 years of his life, I was very close to him. I had been helping him with all the problems he was having, including financially. So I had time to repair the relationship, which is very gratifying now when I look back.
Mm.
And so we were very close the last few years that he was alive, yes.
You know, the title of your book, Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, Paths to Prevention. I don't know anyone who has committed suicide. I myself haven't. Well, I should say I don't have a close friend who's committed suicide. I know people who've done it, but I can't imagine getting to that point. And what did you learn, and what have you learned by, with your podcast and your book? How to shed some light on this for us?
Okay.
I mean, obviously,
Yes.
this is a very complex topic.
It is. And there's no one size fits all or one answer that fits everywhere. But there is one main thing that I've learned about that state that leads someone to suicide. And it goes against our general knowledge, is suicide is not about dying. The person who gets to that point, that's not what they want. They want a different life, and it's about unbearable pain. They want to get out. They want to get rid of the pain, and they don't see, and it's about hopelessness. They don't see any way out. So, I think this is very helpful because it takes some of the judgment away, because there's so much judgment, Guy, about someone who does that. I mean, how can they do that? How can they do that to the family? That's an act of cowardice, right? They're cowards. It's the easy way out. And one of the things that I try to shed a light on my podcast is that it's such an unbearable pain, and they don't see a way out. And believe me, many, many times, and it happened to my dad. Now, looking back, of course, it's easier now that I know about this, but I can see all the signs that my dad was one of those cases that you tick all the warning signs. You can just tick them all now when you look back.
Like what? Such as what, Paula?
Such as what? The ones that I call the red signs, for example, the red warning signs. One of them is giving things away, because you don't see a point in keeping your things, even if it has some sentimental value. So they start just giving away, and that's what he started doing. The other thing that they do when they have, and this is important, when they have decided that they're going to do it. So they're planning, they have it all planned. And that's why I call them red, it's a red light. The other thing is saying goodbye to friends. They start calling friends they haven't talked to in a long time because they want to say goodbye. And I actually had that happen to me with a friend. I'll tell you this story later. The other one is getting their financials organized. They pay debts. My dad actually did that. And I remember a few months before he died, maybe 2-3 months at the most, he called me one day. And as I told you, I was trying to help him with a few situations. And he said, Paula, I need your documents, your ID, because I'm going to open a joint account. And at the time, I thought it was normal. So yeah, no, I've been trying to help him out. So
Sure.
this will make things easier, right? But I know now that that's one of the ways that he found to actually get the financial situation and make it easier for the family to take care of that. So I could do it. And he actually, this was for sure the hardest moment for me when 2 days later after he died, I received a letter that he posted a day before he died. So he had all the instructions on what I should do with the money, what, the apartment should go to my mom. And he had written all of this, and he had he wrote a farewell note to me. And it was the hardest moment. That's the one memory I have of those days, was receiving the letter and just breaking down. I think that was the moment when it just hit me, as this is reality. So these are some of the signs that you should watch for. If they start giving things away, calling people they haven't talked for a while, which is usually to say goodbye. And he did that to my sister. He spent the day before, and that's why I told you she called me the day before, because she could tell there was something off with him. But he went there to say goodbye. If they start to get the affairs in order, that's another sign that they have decided to attempt suicide. So you really, really pay attention to those signs, because they are like the red flags, and it just indicates that they're not just thinking about suicide. They have planned it. They have made the decision.
That word hopeless, when we hear that word, especially within this context of trauma and so forth, and it's so heavy, it's so filled.
Yeah.
What it means to be hopeless, and you're here describing these red flags. Yes, that you can feel that. What else did you find out in your reading, in your research about this?
The other thing that I actually, as I told you, I was interviewing people about, because I wanted to understand. And the biggest surprise that I had, and it left me speechless at the time, Guy, was what I found out about his family and the death of his father. The story that I knew, that he had passed on and told me. So we never talked. And that's the thing that I never thought about before this happened. And then after it happened and I found out what I did, I went, wow, that's why he never talked about his family. He didn't talk about his father ever. And the story I knew about my father and my grandfather was that my grandfather had died when he was 12 years old. My dad was 12 years old, so very young. And then my dad had to help out the family. They were left in poverty, and he had to work at that age to help fight, with her mom, pay the bills. And that's all I knew. And one day I was interviewing his best friend who was married to his sister. And I was talking to my uncle, and I said that, Uncle, can you tell me a little bit about my grandfather? I don't know anything about him. The only thing I know is he died, and I repeated the story. And my uncle looked at me. He was in my house and said, "What? Who told you that?" And I said, "My dad." He said, "Paula, you met your grandfather." So he had died when my dad was already married and had 2 kids. And of course, I was a baby. I didn't remember. I said, "No, I didn't. He died when my dad was 12 years old. How could I have met him?" And so I said, "Paula, I don't know where you get this story from. That's not true. Your dad was already married when he died." And I was speechless. I remember the first thing I did, I said, "Okay, hold on. Did I create this?" Because I thought I created this, right? So I called my sister, my older sister, and said, "Renata, what do you know about Grandpa?" And she told me the same story. He died when my dad was 12, blah, blah, blah. Called my other sister. "What do you know about Grandpa?" Told me the whole story. And I said, "Listen, I didn't create this." So he made it up. That's the story he told us. never talked about it again. And then I understood why. And I said, okay, well, how did he die? And he said he was an alcoholic. And he went to the hospital one day. He was very sick because of the drinking. And when he left, the doctor said, you cannot drink again. If you do, you will die. So he left the hospital, went to a pub, started drinking, and died on the way home. So on that moment, Guy, I just went, wow, I get it. I get the shame. I get the silence. And most of all, I get that that's what he does now. He is an alcoholic. And looking at his dad is like facing himself. It's like looking at a cracked mirror, right? In that moment, I understood so much about my dad. Why? And one of the reasons he drank so much, all the shame involved in it, all the pain that even as a child, I could see it in my dad, but never knew where it came from because he wouldn't share. I know I have this image of my dad listening to music and just doing this, holding his hand and for no reason at all. And you could see the pain and all the questions he had. So it was a great opportunity for me writing the book. It was very painful. I had to stop twice because it was too much. I was reliving his death over and over again. So I had to stop a few times. But I had decided to write that book. So I had to do it. To me, it became a mission. So, but I really understood a lot about my dad that I wish I knew before his death.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up a lot of questions here. So, in the wake of your father's death, you decided to turn things around and talk to us about how that decision came about to become a therapist.
Yeah. So I started, I was reading, I was studying a lot, and I wrote the book. I interviewed a lot of clinicians for the book, many from here, from America, some from Canada, UK. And that's when I decided. I had been working as a journalist for over 20 years, and I had done everything I wanted. I had done TV, everything you can imagine, wrote books. And that's when I decided, you know what? This is it for me now. That's what I should work on. It's unfortunate that it happened, but I have to do something with it. So I wrote the book, and then I put up a web page in Brazil. I started my psychoanalysis training. I'm trained in psychoanalysis. That was my first training. And then I came here for my clinical mental health master's, and that's what I do today. I work very heavily on suicide prevention, either with the population that is at risk for suicide or with grief. It's very important to talk to and to help those who lose someone to suicide because they are at risk too. They have a much higher risk of dying by suicide. So when you work with that kind of grief, you are actually preventing suicide. So these are the two populations that I work with today, and I absolutely love it. I think it's rewarding. I get a lot from it. Like 2 weeks ago, just to give you an example, I received a message from someone that, of course, I don't know the name. I don't even know if it was a man or a woman, but I got a message saying, Paula, I was thinking about doing something to my life, but then I read your book. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you receive a message like that, you just have to keep going.
Let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Paula Fontenelle. Her website is understandsuicide.com. So, okay. I mean, obviously there are a lot of therapists listening to this, a lot of survivors listening to this. I mean, there's so much here, so many ways we can go, but what would you say to those people out there who maybe know someone, or maybe let's say they know someone, or believe someone is contemplating suicide?
The first thing that I can say is, before you have this conversation, think about your idea of what suicide is. What are your biases? Because we all have them. I had them. I still do. We all do. It's a scary topic. We all have opinions about it. Many of them are prejudiced. They're biases. They come from a place of judgment. So you have, first of all, to understand where are you in this topic, right? How do you see suicide before you talk to them, because you can harm instead of help, depending on where you come from. I'll give you one example. You can come to someone and say, listen, I see that you're struggling. I see there's something going on, and I would love to help. I know this is a very difficult conversation to have, but I want you to know that if you're thinking about suicide, I can listen to you. That's one way of doing that. But depending on where you're coming from, you can say something like, listen, I know, I can tell there's something wrong. You're not thinking about suicide, are you? That's the same conversation. Do you agree?
Right.
But chances are they'll shut down and they will not talk to you. So that's why it's important for you to first stop and even rehearse what you're going to say, but talk to them from a place of compassion, not judgment. Don't come with opinions, with rights and wrongs. You should, all the should or should not, or how can you? Don't do that, because they're already in pain. You're just going to make it worse. They're already thinking about the loved ones, and maybe that's why they're holding on to life. It's because they know they're going to hurt. And the other thing to know is many times it's very common that they come from a place of altruism. It's the opposite. They really believe you're going to be better off if they're gone, because their problems, because maybe they struggle with mental health and you've been there for them, and maybe they think you're tired of it, maybe you're a caregiver. So it's not about being a coward, about not thinking about others and not caring that you're going to cause pain. Sometimes it's the opposite. So just do some breathing. And I just posted, I have a course on how to help suicidal people, because that is the most common question I get. Every week I get messages from people. Paula, I know a friend or my brother or my son, parents. So I have a course on that, how to help suicidal people. And then you can find it on my website. Just click on course. But the first thing I have to say is, think about your opinion of suicide and really be careful with your words.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll have the course linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Hearing you go through those two examples of how you might approach someone was, I really appreciate that, because the first one was just so open and it's kind of surprisingly very hands-off. Right. It was, you were just so open if you ever thinking about that. And the second one, of course, was, as you said, much more judgmental,
It's like a punch, right?
Right. And you again, you can't, it's hard to blame people, because this topic is
it's so scary.
It's so scary. It's so heavy. And I think for a lot of people who might know someone, there's a fear that, if that person does commit suicide, there's the feeling that, oh my God, I didn't do anything. What could I have done? What should I have done? I didn't see this. I didn't see those red flags.
Yeah. That's it. It's the hardest thing. And I have to say, Guy, that it's very rare that you talk to someone who lost a loved one that doesn't feel guilt. And it doesn't have to be about the death itself. You feel guilty about the relationship you didn't have, not having time anymore to repair that relationship. It's so many things. But this question, what did I do this? Did I see this? How could I have done more? You see that in caregivers and parents all the time. And parents, oh my goodness, my heart just breaks when I talk to parents, because that's the hardest, because you're supposed to protect your kids. And how could I not have seen that happen, right? But we all can help people who are suicidal. You have to approach them. You have to try to identify where they're at, because we think about suicide as an on and off. They're either thinking about suicide or they're not. It's not. It's a continuum. You start with suicidal thoughts, which happens to a lot of people in difficult situations, in crisis. And then you go into ideation with intent, because you can have the ideation, the thoughts are always there, but you never thought about really doing it. You have no intention. So you go through ideation, and then you have planning, attempt, and then completion. So you have to identify, where are they? Are they planning? Are they just having thoughts? try to identify where they are, because the intervention is different.
Right.
You might have, for example, to call parents if it's a kid. That's something that I talk about on my course a lot. You have to have consent. If they're adults, you have to have consent, because sometimes the first thing we think about is let's contact the family, right? But sometimes that's the worst thing you can do, because that's the source of the problem or the pain. It could be. So you have to be really careful about these things, but talk to them with compassion. I have an author that I absolutely love, Dr. Edwin Shneidman. He's considered the father of suicidology. And he says something that I absolutely love. And he says, when you talk to someone who is suicidal, there are only two questions to ask. One is, where does it hurt? And the second one is, how can I help?
Mm.
So if you
Wow.
keep those two questions in mind, I love Dr. Edwin Shneidman, and I was so fortunate to be able to, I interviewed him for my book, feel like a couple of years before he died.
Oh.
He was just turning 90 when I interviewed him, an amazing man.
I love
But
that.
I never forget that. I mean, where does it hurt and how can I help?
Thank you so much for, talking about the continuum, because it is such a big difference where a lot of us have thoughts of killing ourselves, and there's a big difference between having a fleeting thought, and seriously thinking about it and planning and then acting on that. So that is huge. Wow, that you just really, you hit me with those last two questions. I think were amazing, and they're just so profound. I feel though, Paula, and help me out here, but it feels like if you know someone that there's a feeling to want to do more than just ask these two questions.
No, that's just the beginning question. I'll give you my personal example. I had, and fortunately, I already had the knowledge when it happened. I had a phone call from a friend. And immediately, it didn't take me maybe a minute and a half to identify that she's calling to say goodbye.
Mm.
And I immediately said, listen, I can tell by your voice that there's something going on. Are you thinking about suicide? And this is something that you mentioned, Guy, that we need to talk about. It's a myth to think that if you ask the question, if you say the word, you put the idea in their heads. The idea is already there. So it's the opposite. Actually, it gives them relief that someone finally gave it a name, and they can feel that they can talk to you about. So I told her, listen, tell me what's going on. Are you thinking about suicide? And she just broke down. She started crying on the phone. And I said, listen, I have all the time in the world. I'm just going to sit down right now.
Excuse me, when did this call happen?
This call happened. It was maybe 2 years after I published the book.
Okay.
Or maybe 5 years after my dad died.
Okay.
So I just sat down, tell me what's going on. And that's what I did. I was trying to find out, where is she, right, within the continuum. And she said, well, I have everything planned. She was calling to say goodbye. And that's one of the red flags. They already planned. And she had everything planned for that week.
Wow.
And I said, listen, and this is one of the things that really helps. And it's important to know that sometimes they are in a place of paralysis. They are paralyzed and they don't know. It's not just hopelessness. And it happens with depression. Usually it can be a sign of depression, a symptom that you just can't do anything. You don't have the energy. And I said, listen, I'm going to try to help you. Can you just give me some time? Give me some time. It might work, it might not, I don't know, but let me just try to help you. So what I did was I called, and I knew that she was paralyzed. She really didn't see a way out. She had no hope. I called a doctor that I knew, the one who treated me for depression after the death of my father. I had depression. And I told him the situation, said, you need to see her immediately. So she went to see the doctor. She was diagnosed. In her case, which is not for everybody, but in her case, she had depression. She was diagnosed. She started treatment and she's still alive. This happened, 15 years ago? No, 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, yeah. So that's what you do. You talk to them with no judgment. You listen. This is not a moment for you to talk and talk and talk and give your opinion. That's a moment for you to let them really, it's a release for them. You have to let them talk and express what they're feeling. Where does the pain come from? Where does it hurt? As Dr. Edwin Shneidman says, track the pain. Where does it come from? Try to help them find solutions, because they can't see it. We call it a constricted mind, the tunneling vision. All you see in front of you is suicide. That's the only way out. And you try to open up that door a little bit and give them light. Let the light come in, and you'll be able to do it. They might not be able to do it. And you might have to do what I did. You do something for them. It's not about call me if you need me. No, here's what I'm going to do to help you. And try also to contact people, have a cushion of people, because that's a very tough thing to do alone. So broaden that social network too, with consent. Always ask them, who can we bring in to help you? Who is someone you trust? So you try to bring in these people to help them out.
I could just imagine, asking those questions, or even as you did, just bringing up the topic, how freeing that could be for that person. Where
it is.
Right. Yeah. They're probably, obviously it's different for everybody, but this topic is so heavy. They feel, a lot of us don't want to talk about it. And by doing that, you're creating that space for them, that opening for them that you're talking about here. Paula, this is amazing. Really, the way you're talking about this and articulating this, I really appreciate it. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
My website, understandsuicide.com, and there you can see my podcast is Understand. They all have the same name, Understand Suicide. So my podcast you can find everywhere. My YouTube channel, same thing, either my name or Understand Suicide. So, but I think my website is the best, because there you can find the course, you can find the podcast, and there's a lot of resources there. I'm always updating the website to make sure that I give like hotline numbers if you can call, or find groups. It's very, very helpful to find support groups in your area, so you can search there. So there are many, many resources on the website. I think that's the best.
Okay. And you mentioned Edwin Shneidman.
Yeah.
Does he have a book?
Yeah. He has one that I absolutely love. It's The Suicidal Mind.
Okay.
It really helps understand what goes on in their mind. And that's one of the modules in my course too. Awesome.
Paula, I want to thank you so much for being here. I'd love to have you back and continue on this topic. I mean, there's so many, I think, other things we could talk about. And
we could talk about grief, because it's a very unique kind of grief, and not many people know, again, what to do with it, right? We survivors, what we meet is silence.
Again, thank you so much for being here. All right, take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Guy.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.